Today, we're talking about HUBSCO Plus, which is the reporting mechanism for local governments, counties, municipalities, school systems to report on building construction projects and the hub vendors that they use for them. And I'm going to turn it over to Leslie for the first few slides, and she'll tell me when I'm supposed to come back on.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. This is once again our HUBSCO Plus training seminar. We are going to go over the following topics, and this is what you will learn from this particular training. We're going to do an overview of the Hub requirements, as well as the Hub Plus features, how to log in to HUBSCO Plus, navigating through HUBSCO Plus, adding formal and informal projects, and finally, how to run quarterly reports. So a lot of times we have vendors or new vendors, people learning about the program. They want to know, what is HUB? So HUB, per the statute, North Carolina General Statute, you can find the clear definition in 143-128.4, where it states that at least 51% of a business is owned by one or more persons who are members of at least one of the groups that are stated within the 143-128.4, Section B. The management and daily operations must be controlled by at least one owner in one of the groups in the same statute. What are the HUB certification categories? Those categories are: the person that owns the business must fit in one of these particular categories: Black, Hispanic, Asian American, American Indian, female, disabled, disadvantaged, and finally, one of the newer categories is employee stock ownership plan. And John will share more about the ESOP later in the presentation. HUB construction requirements. These requirements cannot be found also in the North Carolina General Statute. Under the state building projects, at least 10% of the goal for the state agencies, community colleges, and public universities. For local government units, in North Carolina General Statute 143-128.2, if any state funds for a building project and cost is $100,000 plus, 10% shall be towards that HUB goal, that 10% HUB goal. If cost is $300,000 plus and paid for with local funds, no state dollars, the goal is established by the local government. Also, when it comes to local government unit, this includes projects done by a private entity on a facility to be leased or purchased by the local government. And lastly, notice and public hearing required on appropriate percentage goal for minority participation for building projects. We have a great resource with the UNC Chapel Hill School of Government. These guidelines and development documents for supporting minority businesses and participation programs, you can use, click this link that was sent out in the presentation. If you hover over the link, all you have to do is click it, and that resource is there for you to view. What is HUBSCO Plus? So HUBSCO was developed by the North Carolina Hub Office and the North Carolina Department of Information Technology, NCDIT, to allow local governments to have a dedicated method of providing reports of HUB utilization on design and construction projects. Please note, only local governments, towns, cities, villages, counties, school systems, etc., use HUBSCO Plus. Community colleges, public universities, and state agencies use Interscope. This training will not help staff from those organizations.
So quick question. Do we have anybody from a community college, public university, or state agency on the call? If so, you're welcome to stay and hear about HUBSCO Plus. Just know that a lot of the screens will be different in Interscope than they are in HUBSCO.
So what should you know about construction reporting? Construction requirements, minority business participation goals, which we spoke about in the previous slides, public entity responsibilities, good faith efforts, and reporting. Per the North Carolina General Statute 143-128.4, Section A1, as used in this chapter, the term minority business means a historically underutilized business. Projects that do not need to be reported, prefabricated or relocatable buildings or portions thereof, except that portion of work which must be performed at the construction site, do not need to be reported. This information you can find in the general statute as well, 143-128.2, Section I. Street and utility projects are not required to be reported. Now, on to what projects that do need to be reported. Projects that are 30,000 or more need to be reported, and that cost includes the total cost. So that 30,000 is the total cost. Building construction or repair projects per the UNC schools government information, the statutory requirements. Once again, if you hover over that link in the presentation that you receive via email, you're able to click that link. It'll give you information about this particular note. Building is not defined in that statute. Webster's 11th edition defines a building as a roofed or walled structure building for permanent use. So just for clarification, what a building is. Projects that do need to be reported also applies to wastewater treatment systems, wastewater collection systems, water supply systems, and water conservation projects. If grant funds or loans specify use of minority firms, then yes, that needs to be reported. And just a little tip, use whole numbers only with no decimal points when putting in the information in the reporting in HUBSCO.
And sort of a follow-up to that is you probably not need to put in a percentage symbol or a dollar symbol. So you probably just need to put in the value that is being asked for.
And John, we have a question from, is it David?
Yes.
Okay, go right ahead.
David, do you want to go ahead with your question? I think I just left you a voicemail this morning.
Yeah, so it stated that if it's only grant funded, is that correct, that the reporting is required if it's only grant funded?
The type of reporting that we're referring to here on the grant funding, if there is state funding, then you should be reporting on the wastewater treatment, wastewater collection systems, wastewater supply systems, or water conservation projects. But if you've got a grant from like Department of Environmental Quality, it's going to specify the use of minority firms. So we're referring to that. If you get a grant for these things, make sure that you understand what the grant is asking for. If you get a grant for something and it doesn't specify anything about minority firms, then you have the option to not report. We would hope that you would report, but you would have the option to not report if the grant says nothing about minority firms. If you are putting your own money into it, your own local government's money, then you should probably be reporting on that.
Do we have any other questions? Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and you're also welcome to type your questions in the chat. So we do have a upcoming deadline for fiscal year 24-25 in a couple of weeks. October 10th, 2024, your quarter one report is due. We have, of course, John, like he spoke earlier about our colleagues in the western part of the state. This is a totally negates about reporting due to the devastation from the hurricane. These dates can actually be found on our website. You should have received an email reminder about the upcoming reports being due via HUBSCO. We want to make sure that we have everyone's correct information when it comes to email and who to contact. That's why it's important if everyone that attends the webinar today completes the attendance form so that we'll have correct contact information. Once again, these dates are available on our website at NCDOA Hub Construction Expenditure Reporting. You can find that information there. And once again, the presentation that you received via email, you can hover over that link and you click it and information will pop up. A lot of people like to go ahead and put these dates in their calendar reminder just to have it visible to them all the time. And feel free to copy and paste this information wherever you need to be reminded. Looks like we have a question in the chat, John. If funding is from the county, we do need to report it, or is it optional?
That's a little fuzzy, and it may depend on what is involved in the project. If it's if there is a portion of it that you're actually building the facility that does the wastewater treatment, if that's the case, then anything associated with that project should be reported. If it is, we're laying pipe and it's just, we need more wastewater pipe or water pipe there, that's a little bit more in the fuzzy area. We do have some advice from the Attorney General from years past related to grant funding. And that's why we specifically say grant funding for those types of projects. It doesn't, if I recall correctly, it didn't specify if there were not grant funds in that question. So I think it is a little bit up in the air. So there are times when it's really super clear what a building is. And I'll use a school example. If you're building a gymnasium, that's a roofed structure. It's going to have walls. It's going to have electricity. It's going to have water and plumbing in there. If you're building a tennis court, that's outside. There's no roof. There's no wall. I mean, it's there for a purpose. There may be electrical on there. There might be some water out there if you've got water fountains, but it's a little bit gray. If you're doing it as a total new school and that's part of the school, include that. But if you are just adding on, hey, here's a new basketball court, here's a new tennis court, that is something that you can choose whether you're going to report it or not. We would prefer that everything be reported, but that is a little bit of fuzziness in the statute that that allows some discretion on your part to decide about doing that. Somebody said restroom facelift projects. Not totally sure what's involved in a facelift project, but a lot of times also the example that I'll use for parks related kinds of things, there may be a shelter and you may have some picnic benches under the shelter. If all it is a roof and some picnic benches, then you have the choice of whether to report that or not. But as soon as you add a bathroom onto that, that becomes a building that should be reported, because then it is a roofed enclosed structure that's permanent as long as it'll last, with all those utilities that have to go in there. So updating and remodeling bathrooms, yes, I would consider that as eligible for this, because the statutes talk about new construction as well as repair and renovation. So I would consider updating and remodeling bathrooms as something that would fit and be reportable under this under these statutes, as long as the total project it costs $30,000 or more. You can choose to report at a lower dollar value, but $30,000 and up is the requirement.
Any other questions before going to the next slide? All right, thank you guys. And now I'll turn it over to John to talk about good faith efforts.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Leslie, for taking care of that section. So we're going to talk a little bit about good faith efforts here. This is construction reporting. Good faith efforts do depend a little bit on the project size. So anything that would be considered an informal project that you're not putting out publicly for bid, all those good faith efforts are on the owner. You can choose to request that the bidders do something, but in the statute, it's all about the owner. So the agency, school, university, local government, county government, it's all on them. And there's a few things that they have to do. It's basically, identifying firms that could do the work, reaching out to them, keeping documentation on that, and reporting on the project. So a lot of times we'll talk about owners, and the owner would be that typically is the capital project coordinator, or their designee, or the person who's in charge of the contract at the local level, project manager at the school system or the county or the town. The designers would be the architects or engineers on the project, and then the companies bidding on the project, they have some good faith efforts to do on formal projects. So on an informal project, oh, there it is. I just need to look on the other side of the slide. The things that the local governments have to do is solicit minority participation, and note that says erection, construction, alteration, or repair of any building. So that kind of covers that updating, remodeling bathrooms example. Maintaining a record of the contractors solicited, so know who you reached out to. Keep those emails that you sent out to folks, and document efforts to recruit minority business participation in those contracts. So you may have done some posting of the opportunity on the Hub Office website. If it's really informal, you might not do that. You might just say, hey, I'm reaching out to 10 vendors. Here are the vendors that I'm reaching out to. And you want to make sure that you keep up with which of those vendors are minority businesses. You actually want to identify them before you reach out, so that you make sure that you are including vendors in the process. The whole process with Hub, it's about opportunity. We do track the dollars, we do track the goal, but it's about making sure that Hub vendors have an opportunity to get work. There's no guarantees. They have to be able to do the work. They have to be the lowest bidder in most cases. So it is about opportunity. So again, coming back to this, you do need to document your efforts to recruit minority business participation and report all the data and documentation of efforts to recruit minority participation to the Hub office upon completion of the project. And again, for informal projects, formal advertisement of bids is not required. And there is a little bit of overlap in the high end of what an informal project is, but the low end is $30,000. The high end goes up to $500,000, but we have another statute that's related to Hub that goes down to lower dollar values. So and since they overlap, UNC School of Government says use the more restrictive requirement. So if you have a $400,000 project, don't treat it as formal, as informal. Treat it as a formal project. So the public entity has some good faith effort requirements, as well as the bidders in that case. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So for good faith efforts for projects $300,000 and above, before awarding the contract, the public entity needs to do some things. Develop and implement a Hub participation outreach plan. How are you going to reach out to Hub vendors? Attend the scheduled pre-bid conference. That's usually fairly easy to do. So the owner has to attend that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific individual, as long as there's representation from the organization at that pre-bid conference. Notify interested hubs about opportunities to bid on a project at least 10 days before bid opening. And that notification needs to describe the work, the date, time, location where bids are to be submitted, public entities contact person for the project, where bid documents can be reviewed, any special requirements for the project, and to utilize other media likely to inform hubs of the opportunity to bid. And the Hub office does have some resources in that area. There is actually some minority media outlets that focus on particular populations or geographies where it might make sense to place a bid or an ad in those organizations. Those ads will not be free. You can post on the Hub office site, that is free, but to target specific areas or groups, and if you use those minority media, you may have to pay some ad dollar costs. Switching over, before we do that, let's see if anybody has any questions here. We're not necessarily designed to, is it 10 days or 10 business days? Sarah, I'd probably have to look at the statute. I think if it does not specify, it's something that I heard from UNC School of Government last week, is that if it doesn't specify, as long as you say in your documents how long you're going to do it, that's how long it should be done. We would count it here if somebody submits a request to post on our Hub solicitation opportunity page, and they don't give us 10 calendar days, then we would not post it. So our interpretation of that is calendar days. Hopefully that's helpful. If you put it in your plan that we're looking at that as 10 business days, I think if as long as you have that documented and it's intentional and it's not going back after the fact going, oops, we didn't give enough time, we need to change which kind of days that is. If you do it ahead of time, I think that makes sense, that you can decide calendar days or business days. Okay, so when we come to HUBSCO is just the system that we use to capture data for this reporting. It's sometimes people call it, think about HUBSCO as more than just that system, but it is just the system for reporting this data. So there's a login page here, and there's a user ID and a password that everybody has. If you forget your password, you have the ability to click on that link and get something sent to you that will allow you to reset your password. We do not have the ability on our end to reset anybody's password or to change it. So that is something that the users have the capability of doing. There are some times when people have come in and they get a note that their login ID is, I forget the term. I think Leslie encountered it the other day where they're trying to log in and they can't, and it gives them a message that it's not blocked or inactivated. It's just like temporarily unable to log in. And in those cases, typically you would need to wait for about, we recommend 2 hours, and then come back and try to log in again. If you do come back, if you wait and come back, I would only try your password once. And if that doesn't work, then click the forgot change password piece so that you don't get locked out again. So once you do log in, you'll see a main screen that shows your inbox. It'll show any informal projects or formal projects that you've got open, and it'll give the project number, project name, creation date, and you can edit or delete those. Be careful about deleting, because once you delete it, it's gone. It will prompt you to say, are you really sure you want to do this? But deleting can be a big challenge if you've entered a lot of data and you have to do it all over again. So some new features in HUBSCO Plus. You might remember HUBSCO Plus just came online last year in 2023. Previously, HUBSCO was a 20-year-old system, literally 20 years old. So we kept all the data from the previous system is in HUBSCO Plus. And we kept a lot of the look and feel of it, but some of the things that we did a little bit differently. There's now a search for vendors, both hub and non-hub, in the system. So as long as the vendor you're trying to enter data in for is in the electronic vendor portal system, their information will be in here. And if they're currently hub certified, it will bring over that information. The good thing about that is it reduces the amount of data entry that you have to do for each vendor. There occasionally people enter things in under the wrong category. They meant to do it under formal, but they started entering it under informal. Some of those fields are a little bit different, but instead of having to go back out and totally restart a new project, there is the ability to swap them and say, oh, I need to switch this from informal to formal, or you could do it the other way around if you need to, so that you don't have to go in and redo all that data entry. Some tips and tricks that we talked about for login. This is something, so wait 2 hours if you get snagged up on logging in. It will allow your account to unlock on its own. Select the forgot password once the 2 hours has passed and follow the instructions there. You'll receive an email notifying you about that temporary password. And you can also email us at the hubsco@doa.nc.gov address. And Leslie, you've got your hand up. Is it for the question in the chat?
It is. I know we were going to go over that, and I didn't know if you were going to wait to answer it when we got there.
Why don't you ask it now, and we'll see what we can do.
All right. So we have a question in the chat. How do we know what the project number is? I've been using our purchase order number as the project number.
And HUBSCO Plus does not assign a number. The number is completely up to you as to what you want to put it in there. Hopefully it will make sense to you. If purchase order is the thing that makes sense to have as a project number, that is totally fine. Same thing with the project name. You can call it whatever you want. Hopefully it's something logical that will make sense when you're coming back to take a look at it later on. Sometimes staff changes over time, and if you need to go back, you can take a look at it, and as long as it makes sense that you'll be able to figure it out and somebody else coming behind you will be able to figure it out. And let's see, somebody said, I have to leave and go to another meeting. I have several questions. Who can I contact for questions? And she gives her email address. So the email address that's up here, the hubsco@doa.nc.gov, is a good one to send information to. We can also put our email addresses in the system. Leslie, would you mind putting ours, mine in there? We may be able to touch base with Roxanne as well, but please at least put my email address in there so that she can ask whatever questions she needs to. And we can probably email her later on if she's got to leave first. Okay, so and also Sarah Kirby said that they use PO numbers and contract numbers for their project numbers. Okay, so let's move on. The HUBSCO Plus inbox, once you get into your, once you log in, you'll be able to see your informal projects and your formal projects, and you'll be able to actually add projects from there. There's like an add formal link that you click and an add informal, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And it will display all the projects in your inbox. Once you finalize them, I believe they go away from this inbox. But there's another way that you can go back and find them later on. It can show all the projects for just you as you log in, but it can also, you can also switch it up so you can see all the projects from everybody in there. We actually had an actual reason to figure this out. City of Charlotte contacted us and said, hey, we had a bunch of people leave and we want to make sure that we can see the projects that they did. And when they were looking, when they had logged in for themselves, they could see their own stuff, but they couldn't see the projects that somebody else who was gone had done. But when they clicked show inbox for Union County Schools, they were able to see everybody's projects. Actually, it was City of Charlotte. So if they clicked show inbox for City of Charlotte, they would have been able to see all the projects in there, not just the ones for the individual who logged in. And that's this show inbox for whoever. So if you see this up here, show inbox for Penny Helms, and I know we had some folks on the call. I think Jennifer, who contacted us this morning, that said Penny's not going to be, the one doing this anymore. We are a little bit heartbroken because Penny has a place in our hearts because we've been using her ID on the training side for us to be able to get all these screenshots and log in and do practice runs of projects. So we appreciate her and your organization so that we can bring this information to you. But this is just to show you where you would go to click to switch back and forth on that. And that does show you which projects you can edit or delete. So there is a section in HUBSCO Plus that's about administration, and there are certain things that, depending on your access level, that you can do. So we have folks who can submit reports, they can enter in all the data for a project, and they can finalize that report. And then they can go back and say, you know what, I want to see how we did. We had several reports overall. How did it add up all together? They can go back in and pull those reports. But there's also folks who are designated as system administrators, and those people can go in and do some same things, enter data, pull reports, but they can also add other users, and they can go in and say, hey, we didn't have anything finished this quarter, because that happens, especially if you're in a small community and you have like one project. You may not have a ton of projects going on at one time, or you may have a bunch of projects going on, but they're really long and they take a year and a half to complete. So you may not be able to finish it in 6 months. You might not have something to report as a finalized project every quarter. So when that happens, if you don't have any projects finalized, you have the ability to go in and say that, and system administrators can do that, but the folks who are listed as reporters or just users don't have that capability, because they want to make sure that the system administrator theoretically has a higher level view of all the projects going on, and somebody who is designated as, here, enter this data, they might not know about all the projects that have been finalized. That's why some people can do this, but some people cannot. But in order to get to the administration part, you hover over administration, and it will bring down a drop-down menu. If we go back, this is navigating through here. You have administration, projects, and report at the top. And if you hover over administration, you can see the public entity, send email. If you hover over projects, you can see main page, project inbox, search for projects, informal project, no formal projects, no quarterly project submittal. If you're not a system administrator, you will not see that one right at the bottom, no quarterly project submittal. And reports, you hover over reports and you see the reports that are available. So again, this is system administrator screens. If you go to the public entity screen, you can see you have the ability to edit, and it'll tell you what organization you are. Just might be useful to know that, yes, I'm really logged in for Union County Public Schools, and you can see your users over on the far right. So if you click that little people person with the lock symbol next to it, it will tell you all the people in your organization that have access to HUBSCO, and you can look and see what their different access levels are. And you can edit the public information. Your address might change, phone number might change, so you can come in here and update that information. The primary contact person might change, so you need to come in here and change that, as well as the responsible official might change too. So the system administrator would be able to go in here and update all these things. And this is the last section of that public information piece, and it says, was a minority business outreach plan developed and implemented? The answer should always be yes, but we want you to be truthful. If you don't have one, select the right answer for you, and then enter when the plan was implemented, what your goal is. There are some organizations, very few, but we wanted to make sure they had the capability here to create goals that were, or to list the goals in here based on the different ownership categories. So this is not used very often. Typically, there's just a verifiable percent goal for the whole project, and it defaults to 10%, but you can change it. And if you have any state funds in a project, 10% is going to be your goal. But if you don't have any state funds, then you have more flexibility in what that goal will be. And then it's, how did you determine your goal? When did you establish the goal? And how did you certify that method? And that is different than how you figured out what the goal would be. That's how you actually decided it would be a goal. That could be board records, or it's a policy, or it's in our procedures, something like that. And you can provide some comments down there as well if you need to. So that's probably not something that people are going to mess with a whole lot, but they might have to enter new users more frequently. And again, this is for system administrators. System administrators can add new folks. They can delete users if they've left the organization or retired. Deleting the user does not delete the data that they've entered, so their projects will still be there in the system. They can also edit existing users. Sometimes emails change, or phone numbers, or names. So it is possible to make those changes. Just don't try to do it on yourself. If you are the system administrator, it won't work. You have to have another system administrator change your information. I tried to do that once. it took me a little time to figure out why it wasn't working. But once I figured that out, I just had somebody else update my information as was needed. Because at one point we had a different phone number, so we had to change those. Your password will not be visible here, but it will show your security access. And typically there are some other security access levels, but we typically only assign public entity user, which is the person who can enter the data and pull reports, and the entity system administrator. Okay. Any questions about system administration information? This is the no project quarterly submittal piece. I feel like I've spent more time on this than I need to, but I want to make sure that anybody who, is in this system administrator role understands their capabilities. So if you want to select no project quarterly submittal, you'd hover over projects, go down to that no quarterly project submittal, click on it, and it will open this screen down at the bottom, and it'll say for fiscal 4, and that means quarter 4, 2022-2023. It's saying that for this quarter, you don't have any projects, formal or informal, that have been completed. And if that's the case, you can go ahead and click no projects this fiscal quarter. And as long as you do that for quarter 1, as long as you do that by October 10th, the system will say, great, for quarter 1, you didn't have anything finalized. I would recommend that you wait until the quarter is over before you do this, but don't do it on October 11th, because it will think that you are talking about quarter 2, and then it will say no projects were submitted for quarter 2, even though it's the very beginning of the quarter. Looks like we've got a question. Farrelly, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. So finalized, does that mean the project has been completed or that it was started?
Finalized is everything is done. All the payments have been made. The building is up. You're using it. There's nothing more that needs to be done with it. And all the payments have been made. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about adding formal and informal projects, and they're very similar, but there are a few differences to them. I believe we're going through and we're doing a formal project, but we'll see as we go. So in order to add a project, there's a couple different ways that you can do it. From this main screen, you can add informal or add formal at the top of the tables. You can also select it from your drop-down menus as well. Here's the HUBSCO Plus flow for adding projects. You have to click that, add the project thing. Then you have to go to the main project data entry screen. You have to do that first. Then you have the option to do the primary designer screen or the construction contract screen next. But we would recommend just going project main to project primary designer, and then to construction contract screen. And then from there, construction contract solicited directly screen, and construction contractor used contract, that's for the contractor or subcontractor. And then you can look at the project view. You can look at the project view at any time you want to, but this just is kind of a flow that you can go to. And then once you've done all those things, you can finalize the project. So again, the first place you're going to come to once you're adding a project is that project main data entry screen. It's going to ask you a lot of basic questions about the project. Here's where you would have that project number. So if you're using the contract number or the PO, you would put that in the project number. Project name, again, is whatever you want to call it. Hopefully it will be something that's logical, that somebody else could understand what project it is. And then it'll tell you who it will ask you for the notice to proceed or project start date and the completion date on the project, what type of construction method you used, where it was located county-wise. So what county it was located in, your total square footage will be in there. If you are just doing the water lines or sewer lines, and you're not doing something that has square feet in it, you would enter 0 on the total square footage, and you would add the linear feet in that total linear footage field. The original project value would be the amount that was submitted for the bid. You would have final design related services value, final construction value, any miscellaneous costs, and then the final project value. And that you won't have to calculate that final project value. It'll do it for you. And you'll indicate if there's state grant funds or not, or an appropriation in there, and then what the verifiable percentage goal is. And that, again, defaults to 10%. And you can't add a decimal in there. This is the goal that you set, not that the bidder submits to you, but what your goal is. So if they come back and say, we're doing 2.45%, you don't add 2.45%. You have your 10% goal, whatever your goal was. Somebody asked what an example of a miscellaneous cost might be. That could be something like, trying to think of a good example right now. It's like permitting fees or something along those lines. I think would probably be miscellaneous costs. It's not something that you really have necessarily control over. And it's not really part of the design. It's not really part of the construction. Does that help? It's a little nebulous. I understand. So on the left side of this is what the fields look like before you enter it, and on the right is what it looks like after you enter that. Let's see. Someone was talking to me when you went over the square footage. If we built a park, do we need square footage or linear footage of the park property or the buildings on the property? If you're building a park, you'd probably be looking at the buildings on the property, not the acreage of the property itself. So that linear feet is for if you're just putting in like water piping or sewer pipes, and you're not doing it in association with an actual building. So it's there as if this is just a wastewater treatment piping situation, we want you to have the ability to enter that in. Does that make sense, Latasha? If you're building a park and you've got a bunch of like a central place where people can go, and like a visitor center and then some restrooms off to the side, you would be counting the visitor center square footage and the restroom center square footage if they were all being done as part of the same project. But you wouldn't count the outside area. Okay. All right, great. Okay, so here's the project main view. Again, once you've entered that information, the tabs that you'll see after you do that are project, designers, contracts, project view, and finalized project. And basically, if you start at the left, you already did project, go to designers, finish that, then go to contracts, which is where your subcontractors and contractors will be. And then you can use the project view anytime you want, but typically just go from left to right. And so searching and adding designers to a formal or informal project. So on this one, this is a formal project, and you can see that up at the top. It says project number test, project type formal. So this is a formal project. And this designer, you clicked on the designer tab. In here, you would click add new prime designer. If it's a formal project, you're likely to have a designer. It's theoretically possible you may have somebody in-house do some of the work. So if you didn't put it out for requests for qualifications, then it could be an in-house kind of thing, and you may not have anything to add to designers. Some informal projects may not have designers on them, but if they're formal projects, we would expect to see your designers in there, your architecture and your engineers and whatever consultants they use on this. So once you click that add prime designer, new prime designer, it will open up a screen that says, okay, here's the company name and here's all this contact information here. This is where you would go in and click on that company name and you would be able to enter the company name. If it's in the electronic vendor portal system, it will identify options for you. If you find who you want, you can click on it and it will populate pretty much everything that you see here. It will you'll only have to select the company name and it will populate the rest. If they are Hub certified, it will tell you that. If they're NCSBE certified, it will tell you that. Otherwise, it will probably say NA. So when you're doing the search, just enter the company name. Don't worry about entering any of the rest of this, because if they're in there, it's going to show up. If they don't show up there and you really use them, you can go back in and fill this out manually, and then add that in here. But if you're doing the search, just enter the company name, then click search. It'll give you the list of people that meet your criteria. Probably don't use the entire full name. If my company name was Gunther Construction and Hauling LLC, just type in Gunther. It's specific enough that it could probably find that name and you wouldn't have to scroll through a lot of people. But if you make a mistake with, I missed a space or there was a period there I didn't know about, it's going to be more flexible if you don't enter in the entire name. And then you would click add designer. And if you didn't have a search to do, you just enter all this data yourself and then click add designer. And if they're not in the EVP system, they are not going to be Hub certified. So that's one benefit, is that you'll never have to add in somebody's Hub certification because it would already be in the EVP system. So this is, again, for the designer. Once you select your designer, you'll make sure the contact name is correct. You can this stuff will automatically populate, and then you can save it. If there's no designer found in the search, you could enter that data yourself, and by clicking add new designer here. Okay, so once you get to that point, you've added your designer, it will tell you what your prime designer name is, and then you can select the type of service, discipline. It will already have the ownership category and source in there, and then you'd enter in how you reached out to them. Was it verbal? Was it written? Was it both? And then you can enter in the original contract value, and we recommend that you do this as the project goes along. So as soon as you get a designer, go ahead and enter them in. If they've got an original contract value that you've negotiated with them, go ahead and add that in. And you'll need to come back later to fill out the final contract value, but you may not know that until the project is all done. Let's see, somebody just asked another question or two. We have a project that includes 2 designers and an engineering firms. They are not sub-designers. Will we just add on designers and the other 2 as subs? I believe the system will let you add them separately as prime designers. So you should not have to add them as consultants. I think you would have the ability to add them as their own designer. That probably testing that would probably be helpful. I'm not sure that I've tried that before, but I think that's the case. Let's see, would the name not be found if they are not registered? Yes, if they are not in EVP, their name will not be found. And you may type in a criteria that brings something up that has a search result, but you do need to make sure that the company that you're looking for really is in there. And if they're not on that list, then you would go in and enter them manually. Okay, I think that's the last of the questions right now. Okay, so there's a bunch of there's 4 different types of services: architectural, construction manager, agent, engineering, or other design related services. There are several disciplines, and this presentation that you have the PDF of, this is probably a good reference tool if you're ever like, oh gosh, what do I pick here? You know, there's a drop down menu, but if you want to be prepared ahead of time, you've got this list right here as part of the presentation. And then how did you solicit them? You click save, and it'll show you all the information you just entered in here. If you haven't contracted with them yet, those will be blank, but once you enter those in, they'll start filling up. Once you've entered this, you can edit this prime designer, you can delete them, you can add a consultant. And then for construction contracts for formal projects, and I'm going to try to move a little quicker. And Ying, I think we're going to answer your question right now. So we're going to talk about the construction contracts. This is where we would get to the contractors and the subcontractors. So under contracts, you would add new construction contract, and it would bring up this fairly small screen. You want the contract ID description. Again, that's anything that you want it to be. It might be the same as the project name, but it might not be. So that'll be up to you. And the method of advertisement, there's a few options here. When was the bid opening date? When's the contract date? And when's the notice to proceed, contract start date, or contract completion date? You don't necessarily have to have all of this filled in as you're starting the project, but before you finalize it, all of these dates should be filled in. So once you do that, it will show you the contract that was created, and then you have some additional options here. You can edit what you just put in there. You can go to contractors solicited directly. So this is specifically for informal projects. You have to enter them for informal projects because that's the one where you reach out directly to those vendors and say, hey, would you do the business for us? And they give you a price and you say, oh, I like that one. So you go with it. If it is a formal contract, this is not a required set of fields in HUBSCO Plus, but it is required for informal contracts. You can also go to contractors used and you can delete the contracts. So construction contractors solicited directly. So if you had reached out to somebody and said, I have this project coming up, I want to make sure that we get a bid from you guys in on this, then that would be something that you would enter in. If you sent out a mass email to 200 different contractors, that's not reaching out. We don't consider that solicited directly. So you wouldn't have to enter in all those 200 in there. It's just if you had picked up the phone, and called 4 people on an informal project and said, hey, I want you to provide some pricing for me. Here's what's going on. Or if you have an email about that, keep track of that stuff. But this is where you would put in who you actually reached out to. Then you would click on the Go to Contractor Solicited Directly, click Add New Contractor Solicited Directly, and then you would enter in their information. And again, the firm name is searchable through the EVP system. So anybody who's in EVP, you'll be able to pull them in and all their address information will come in. You will have to fill out the project type of work, date contacted, method of contact, was a quote received, and amount of quote received. I mean, if they didn't give you a quote, you won't enter the dollar amount there. But that's the screen that you would fill out for that. And I think I just kind of covered this. It's the company name, do the search, and select them if they're there. Otherwise, manually enter them by clicking Add New Contractor Solicited. And once you know which contractor you're going to use, you click go to contractors used and select add new contractor, which is this gray oval button here. I think that's an oval. It may not be the right shape name. Then you would search for your vendor. If they're in EVP, select them. It'll populate, and you can choose them. If they were not in EVP, you would add new contractor, and go ahead and manually enter them. We would encourage folks to, if they're not in EVP, please encourage them to go on EVP and register. They don't have to choose all the different options. They don't have to choose e-procurement. They don't have to choose Hub. They don't have to choose NCSBE if they don't want to be certified. But it does make things easier, and when it comes to creating a contract for them, it makes it easier for you here, but it also makes it easier for them if they ever do any business at the state level with a community college, university, or state agency. Having them already in EVP makes it a lot easier to get their contracts managed and written. So once you enter in that prime contractor, it will show up here and say, here's the contractor that you had, here's their location, primary type of work, minority or not, source of ownership, and that's either going to be not applicable or the North Carolina hub office. Those are really the only two options for that source of ownership. And then any contract dates, dollar values. Again, when you're just entering this in, you may not have all the dates available. You may only have the original bid. You won't necessarily have the final dollar value until the end. And it's possible that it could change. There could be change orders. The scope could change significantly. It could decrease, it could increase. So that's why it's not automatic that the original dollar value is also going to be the final dollar value. You'll notice over here on the far left, just to the left of firm name, it says tier. And for this company, it says 0 because they are the prime. So their tier level is 0. And anybody you add under them will have a different number. It'll say 1, 2, or 3, or however many tiers you have. So if somebody's contracted directly to S&J Construction, their tier will be 1. So you could have like 5 different companies down here, and they're all subcontracted to S&J. Their tier would all say 1 right there. So adding a subcontractor, once you have, let me go back, because the action items you can take is you can edit the contractor, or you can add subcontractors. If you click add subcontractor, you'll be able to see a field that's very, very similar to adding a contractor. The main difference being that on a formal project, the contractor, the prime, has to enter in their good faith efforts that they've done. On the subcontractors do not, but all the rest of the information should be very, very similar. Again, firm name, search for it, select it. It'll populate a lot of this. You can select somebody from out of state. That's not a problem. It just asks you what the reason was for using somebody out of state, and it asks for the type of work, contract value, final contract value, and the dates there. Let's see. How do you bypass contractors solicited if you did a mass email instead of calling? I think that it requires us to put in something. If you are doing a formal contract, you could just click on the add contractor button. Let me go back a few slides, see if I can do that. Go back to this screen. So instead, in that case, if this was a formal project and you just sent out a mass email instead of calling folks, you would just click go to contractors used, and you would just not enter anything under contractors solicited directly. Now, you could only do that on formal projects. You cannot do that on informal projects, because if you remember, the informal project statute 143-131 said that the owner has to identify the contractors, has to reach out to them and document who they reached out to. So on an informal contract, you have to do this contractor solicited directly. So yeah, if you have a specific situation where it is an informal contract, if you treated it as a formal, even though it was less than the dollar value that we typically associate with a formal, if you treated it as a formal and said, okay, everybody's got to give us the good faith efforts, we're going to advertise this publicly, then you would enter that as a formal project instead of an informal. So if you treat it as a formal, enter it as a formal. Okay, let's see, I think we're a few things ahead. Okay, here was add subcontractor. This was adding the subcontractor. And then once you do that, you'll see the tiers. 0 equals the prime contractor, 1 equals the subcontractor, in this case, Melissa's Construction, and 2 would be the subcontractor of a subcontractor. So it is possible that Melissa's Construction, maybe they needed an electrician. They subcontracted to an electrician, maybe a plumber as well. And it is possible that S&J Construction had a different tier 1 subcontractor who might also have some other contractor. So maybe Melissa was doing more of the interior work, and some other contractor was focused on concrete. So in this one, it says Melissa Construction primarily doing doors and windows. But if somebody else was doing the concrete, they could also be listed as tier 1 in here as well. And let me go back here. So the options that you have here for the subcontractor, you can edit the subcontractor, you can delete the subcontractor, you can add a subcontractor. So when you click add subcontractor, that will give you a tier 2 subcontractor underneath Melissa. Okay. Project view shows all the data that you've entered. And if there's anything that is missing, it will just not show up on here. So this can be a useful tool before you get to the finalization piece to say, did I enter everybody that I needed to, or am I missing any contractors, subcontractors on here? So here's the project view. Oh, let's see. When you are all done entering things in, okay, question. If we hired architect and they hired the contractor, is the contractor a subcontractor? No, typically those contracts are separate. Typically, the organization would hire the designer and the organization would hire the contractor. That's not, I mean, I haven't run across where the designer is the one who actually hired the contractor. Either way, those things are calculated separately. So the architect would go under designers and the contractor would go under contracts. And they would, if the situation that you are asking about actually happens, then the architect would have to give you all the information that you need in order to enter the information in the contract screen for that contractor. Okay, I don't know quite as much about design build. That's something that we will probably have to test on our end. I think as you select design build, it will tell you what values you need to enter. I'm not sure exactly how that looks. So I'm sorry, David, I don't have a great answer for that. Yeah, so the system may be able to recognize that it's a design build, and in that case, it may act a little differently. The question was, what about design build where the designer hires the contractor? So it might be a little bit different from this example, which is a single prime situation. So once you get to the point of finalizing the project, you think you've entered everything in, go ahead to finalize project. And I think there's a button that says, I want to finalize this project. And it will tell you, hey, you can't do this quite yet because there's some discrepancies in here that need to be cleared up. And I can understand from the perspective of somebody entering the data, especially if they spent a lot of time and there were a lot of contractors or subcontractors on the project, that this might be their most hated screen. But for me, it's my favorite screen in HUBSCO Plus from the perspective of it helps me help other people. And it can help you to identify that there's a problem in the first place. It'll tell you where it's located. It'll tell you that it's the main project page. The field is the final construction value. What's the value there? It says 0. And the error says this must be greater than 0 for project finalization. So you would have to go back to main project page, and you can do that by clicking right there on that blue main project page text, and it will take you to the place where you need to change that value. And once you do that, you do need to make sure that the final construction value matches what you have on your contract's final construction value. Otherwise, you'll get a different error. So the reason that I like this is it gives you the ability to go right where you need to go to fix it, but it also says, this is what's going on. This is the problem that we're seeing. And sometimes this can be confusing and overwhelming. And at that point, we don't want you to despair or throw it to the wind and say, forget it. We want you to take a screenshot of this and email it to us, because then we could probably go in, set up a little Teams meeting, share screens, and walk through it with you and say, this is the issue that you're facing. Here's where you need to go to fix the problem. And so this is one of the most valuable things that we can do to help troubleshoot. So if you get to this point and you try it and you can't seem to get it, before you get frustrated, take a screenshot and send it to us and say, I'm trying to work on this, can't figure it out, please help. And we'll do what we can to help you work through that. And it's typically figure outable. So don't think that it's impossible to resolve. Once you have entered everything in, it'll kind of take you to a similar thing that looks like the project view. It'll show you everything that you've entered in, and then it will, at the bottom, give you the option to finalize the project. And you'd actually select finalize the project at the bottom, and there's no option to return and edit the project after that. It's finalized. And you'll get a screen temporarily that looks like this, and it'll say the project data was successfully submitted. It won't have this red item here that says the screen indicates you have successfully submitted and finalized your project. That's what it does, but you won't see that. So what we recommend here is that you print this out or take a screenshot of it so that you've got it. And if anybody comes back and says, prove that you submitted this, you can pull this up and say, look, here, I submitted it. Here's the date that it was. Here's who did it. And it was, for this organization. The stuff down here at the bottom, it doesn't change. It's basically telling you, keep track of the information that you used for this project for at least for a minimum of 3 years. So it tells you copies of solicitations, telephone logs to solicit quotes, copies of quotes, or responses from each firm submitting the solicitation, and on and on. So again, you can't come back to this once you navigate away from it. So please take a screenshot of it or print it out and keep your documentation for 3 years. So just going to talk a little bit about reports. Mostly you hover over reports and it'll give you some different things that you can look at. The things that we use mostly in the Hub office are the annual and quarterly totals. but we also can look at the construction method reports and the dollars per type of work reports. Those can be useful. So it'll tell you, so this is like the annual report, and it'll tell you this was a construction project, so you can choose between design and construction. In HUBSCO Plus, you really didn't have, I mean, the old version of HUBSCO, you didn't have the ability to do a design report, and we didn't either. We couldn't get aggregate reports to see how we were doing all over the state for this, and now we can, which is fabulous. But you can go in here and you could choose informal or formal or all, and you can choose construction or design. I think both is an option, but we never add them together. We always treat design and construction separately. So it'll tell you, the total value that you reported, total hub that was reported, and what the percentage was, and then it will break it out by the different hub certification categories. So you can see, that 28,000 that was in the black certification category. Other options that you have include the, okay, so this is construction and designs. It's basically what we just looked at, but you can create an Excel spreadsheet of this, so you can export that data so you can have it if you need it for some other use. You can also do dollars by construction amount or construction method and per work type. So this is the per work type: finishes, furnishings, general contracting, construction, everything like that. So so that will allow you to see that if you need it. And we're going to wrap this up, but wanted to share these links and training resources here, and let you know that most of these are on our website. So if you go to the Hub Office website, I don't ever remember it. I just open a browser and type North Carolina Hub Office, and it takes me there. If you scroll down to the image of the 4 guys with shovels and hard hats, click on it, you'll be able to get to these training resources. You'll be able to see when the due dates are. You'll be able to click on the link to HUBSCO, and you'll be able to see all the resources that we've got too. We also do keep annual and detailed reports about spending, both on the goods and services side and construction. And we have those going back to at least, I think it might go back to fiscal year 1999-2000. But we've got them every year going back, so you can see how your organization did over time. But it's set up by fiscal year. So if you want to see multiple years, you'll have to, for your organization, you'll have to look at multiple reports. And then you've got the construction expenditure reporting. That's just, you click on that and you come directly to the construction reporting page with all the links and the due dates. And those were basically those resources.